out on the field, the feeling I feel when I'm living my life for what's real. Make America healthy, feeling like it's time for a change. We're going back to common sense, making America healthy again. We're going back to common sense, making America healthy again. We're going back up healthy again.
Gentlemen,
What's up, guys?
What is happening?
we are here at Club MAHA Live, Wednesday, June 25th, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 Pacific. Kyle Kemper, Damo, Billy in the house. We're missing Johnny tonight. We're missing Dustin tonight. We're missing Ian tonight, but we're going to have a great show regardless. Also, we're going to give away a hat tonight, a MAHA light hat. Damo, you got one of those? Boom. Look at that. It says Make America Healthy Again. It's white on white. That is the MAHA light hat available at clubmaha.com. And we're going to be giving away one of those tonight to someone who comments and participates in the stream. We'll get to that a little bit later. We got a great show tonight. We have
Wayne Miller.
Wayne Miller. We're going to be talking about red light and metabolic health, delving into what all that means. Red light, blue light, red light therapy, getting our bodies in harmony, the power of health and light, and how important it is. Folks, if you have LED lights in your environment, I'd highly recommend considering and looking for alternatives. Potentially candles or incandescent lights are excellent alternatives.
Can you find incandescent lights again now?
Oh, yeah.
They kind of disappeared.
I'm pretty sure they sell them on Amazon, and
They're illegal now.
No, in California. In California, they're illegal, not in all of them.
No, it's the United States. You can't.
United States, they're illegal. You can find a black market.
There is a black market. There literally is a black market. You cannot go find them. There's a black market for a filament in your bulbs at this point. It's absolutely absurd. But Wayne, we actually we saw him at the MAHA Institute roundtable, and Damo texted him. He's like, "Who's this person on stage? We got to check."
I was watching from my car.
Yeah, and it was probably the most impressive presentation there.
I was like, Billy, get him.
Yeah, and then the next day we were sitting hanging out, and he's the first guy that walks in early in the morning, bright and early. Well, I was like, you're the dude.
and just a little. Here's a little preamble of the presentation that we got coming up. That's all you get to see. We're into that.
I saw literally nothing. What a tease.
Boom.
Yep, nothing.
It was something.
Okay.
All right. So in the last week too, there's been a couple different things. Any highlights you guys want to bring up? I certainly have one that I want to bring up.
I want to bring up defunding Gavi. We've spent $8 billion with Gavi, which is Bill Gates's vaccine push agenda situation with the WHO. 8 billion since 2000, I think. So I think 20 years, 25 years, American public has paid $8 billion to his companies. He calls it, capitalism, where he kind of pushes vaccines and makes money on it. Bobby did a great little speech. I'm not sure when it was. I don't know if it was today or yesterday.
I've got it right here. It's 3 minutes. I feel like we haven't listened to enough Bobby recently, so I'm just gonna press play. We're gonna listen to the man, the myth, the remedy known as Kennedy. Let's go, Bobby. What can you say?
I'm pleased to have this opportunity to address the Gavi community. We're living now in a time of upheaval, a time of popular revolt against established institutions that have lost the public trust, and that includes medicine. President Trump and I are committed to earning it back. We will do that by preserving what is honest, what serves our country and the world, and we will sweep away that which is not. A major concern that I share with the president is how the World Health Organization and Gavi partnered together during the COVID-19 pandemic to recommend best practices for social media companies to silence dissenting views, to stifle free speech and legitimate questions during that period. In addition, Gavi has continued to make questionable recommendations encouraging pregnant women to receive COVID-19 vaccines. Having said that, there's much that I admire about Gavi, especially its commitment to making medicine affordable to all the world's people. Gavi has done that part of its job very well. Unfortunately, in its zeal to promote universal vaccination, it has neglected the key issue of vaccine safety. When vaccine safety issues have come before Gavi, Gavi has treated them not as a patient health problem, but as a public relations problem. One example is the DTP vaccine, which the developed world replaced a long time ago with a much safer DTaP vaccine. A landmark study in 2017 by 5 highly regarded mainstream vaccine experts found that girls vaccinated with DTP were 10 times more likely to die from all causes in the first 6 months of life than those children who were unvaccinated. The 2017 study was published in an Elsevier peer-reviewed journal, which collaborates with The Lancet, and was funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark and the European Union. The authors of this study were 5 internationally revered deities of vaccine research, all of whom are strong vaccine proponents. The study therefore concluded, and I quote, "All currently available evidence suggests that the DTP vaccine may kill more children from other causes than it saves from diphtheria, tetanus, or pertussis." End quote. Gavi has nonetheless promoted the DTP vaccine heavily in developing countries. It's now the most popular vaccine in the world, despite compelling peer-reviewed research by eminent scientists associating it with very high increases in all-cause mortality among children. When the science was inconvenient, Gavi ignored the science. I call on Gavi today to re-earn the public trust and to justify the $8 billion that America has provided in funding since 2001. And I'll tell you how to start taking vaccine safety seriously. Consider the best science available, even when the science contradicts established paradigms. Until that happens, the United States won't contribute more to Gavi. Define success not just in terms of the number of vaccines delivered, but on their rigorously measured overall impacts. Business as usual is over. Unaccountable and opaque policymaking is over. I invite all of you to join us in a new era of evidence-based medicine, gold standard science, and integrity. Thank you very much.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human
Great. Great.
Yeah, it's solid.
I mean, the whole idea that the first world countries get the new and rejuvenated version and the third world countries get the old, outdated one that's causing issues. Not like they all don't cause issues. I think they all cause issues, but nonetheless, maybe they took out something and redid it like they did with some of those other vaccines and kept saying they're better each time they reformulate it, even though it's really not. That's my personal opinion.
I mean, I thought that was like addressed directly to Gavi, and they're like, "Oh man, like, let's go!" Like, you know, and saying, being like, you know, classic gentleman Bobby. Like, you know, he made a very clear, cogent statement, and then said, "We're not going to fund you any longer. And how about you justify the $8 billion, you know, that we've spent to date?" And when you're not listening to the science, and or like, you know, a new science, it's interesting how the word science it's really become, you know, even just a contentious word now, but it's the reality we live in. But that was really nice to just enjoy 4 minutes of Bobby. It looks great.
I like it when he can quote vaccine supporters, because obviously when he says these things, most of his supporters are going to be pretty much fine with it anyway, but it's the other side that needs convincing. So if it's vaccine supporters backing his pushback, it's helpful.
That's the one thing I hear quite a bit is that people are really upset that he gives any light to the fact that any vaccines work, or that like here he's highlighting for some of their access to, cheaper medicine.
Yeah, I mean, you can't please all the people all the time.
Well, I go one step further: is you can't take that away from the scientific elite right now. It's a long process. So,
yeah. I just want to take a quick second to thank Rhett and Tyler for reposting the stream. If you enjoy what you're hearing, please repost the stream.
Yeah, repost that stream. Rhett, always great for you to be here. Tyler, legends, gentlemen, let's go. Let's
Thanks,
grow.
boys.
Make America healthy again. All right, I got another Bobby clip. Let's roll on the next one here, because this one also, this one I think was a little bit triggering for a bunch of people, including myself. And I ended up making a post that, got a fair bit of traction. It wasn't I'm kind of respectfully disagreeing, but I also just watched the short version one. So we're going to watch the longer version one. It's only 1:30, but this is regarding wearables.
Secretary Kennedy, my first question is that there is a tremendous amount of research that shows that greater engagement with one's health leads to better outcomes. In recent years, American innovators have created and improved wearable devices so that not only are consumers able to better engage with their health through monitoring data, but they are able to share that data with providers. I believe American consumers, in line with the 21st Century Cures Act, should be able to access these innovative wellness tools. Secretary Kennedy, do you agree that consumers should continue to have access to these tools?
Absolutely. In fact, we're about to launch one of the biggest advertising campaigns in HHS history to encourage Americans to use wearables. It's a way of people can take control over their own health. They can take responsibility. They can see, as you know, what food is doing to their glucose levels, their heart rates, and a number of other metrics as they eat it. And they can begin to make good judgments about their diet, about their physical activity, about the way that they live their lives. We think that wearables are a key to the MAHA agenda, making America healthy again. And we are going to, my vision is that every American is wearing a wearable within 4 years.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, the big blowback on that. My personal thought is, I don't think, it's not like a mandatory thing. Like everybody's wearing wearables, but the idea is that if it's super easily accessible, right, and you could put it on and find out you have a heart murmur, or find out you have low blood pressure, or whatever the thing is you can get on a wearable these days. I mean, at this point, wearables, they're using them for diabetes. I mean, people, that's a wearable. You're putting something on, you're monitoring your glucose, you know where your spikes are, and you're changing your food habits because when you have the bread in the morning, your glucose levels are off the charts. And so you're like, whoa, wait a second, that's a warning. And that's that type of metabolic health that you miss for 10 years can take years off your life.
So what James James has a simple question here. Hey, James, by the way, what is a wearable?
A wearable is anything that you can put in your body that monitors and checks your vital stats across a number of levels. So an Apple Watch, a mood ring, the biohacker Brian Johnson wears one. It's something where you can tune in to exactly what's going on in your body and monitor things that are going on when you do things to your body. So whether you exercise, you put medicine in your body, you're taking glucose, you're eating bread in the morning, you're taking insulin, whatever your vitamins, whatever you're doing, things happen and change in your body. So I think we're at the beginning stages of wearables where it's pretty simple. A lot of the wearables are like watches, a mood ring, and things for diabetes. So you're monitoring, that. So that's a wearable. You put it on and you wear it. I think what most people are thinking is Kennedy's like, we're gonna come in and put something on you, and the government's gonna be watching you. I honestly don't think that's what he means. I don't think he's wanting to, and it would be nearly impossible to try to monitor everybody on that level. I think it's more the easy access. Some of the rich have this access where they can put this on and change their diet and what they're eating daily, because they know if they're waking up and eating this thing and they're seeing a huge sugar spike, that can take years off your life if you do that for 10 or 15 years.
Quick question. Would that kind of monitoring that I think most people are freaked out about violate HIPAA?
No. Well, I think where people are jumping the gun is that you put a wearable on and you're connecting.
I mean, government monitoring. Sorry, not like personal health and your own personal ability to monitor the data about what's going on in your health, but like the monitoring that privacy concerns would bring up.
There's definitely privacy concerns.
Right.
I mean, there's privacy concerns across the board. I mean, you're talking about if we give you money for your food stamps, you can't buy soda. That's kind of a monitoring of like, we don't want to give you something. And so that is a monitoring. I think what he's referring to is a personal monitoring, and what appears to be to me, and I talk about this, like a breakaway civilization where certain groups of people have access to certain types of medicine. And you can look at this in the very simplest ways. You get on the highway and you can spend $20 to go faster for the next 2 hours in this lane. Or there's a football player who has an accident and within seconds, he's got millions of dollars of med tech on his body to save him because he's worth $15 million a year. The people in this broadcast right now, we're not worth $15 million a year. So if we break a neck or break something, we're not going to have someone come running out and putting that very expensive med tech on us. So I believe what Mr. Kennedy's talking about, Secretary Kennedy, is more the idea of access to something so you can monitor what's going on in your own world and make very valid decisions on what you're eating. Because I think if most people tomorrow, if 1,000 people went out tomorrow and put a wearable on that monitored their insulin levels and watched their blood spike with sugars, they would go, what is going on when I ate that bagel? And they would see that, and if there was a chart that you could monitor that this is not good every day for you to be doing this, they would say, okay, well, what's the details here? Like, don't eat that bread every morning. So I think that's kind of where I see that.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a great opportunity in getting more feedback around diet, around exercise, monitoring your sleep. Like, there's a lot of these feedback loops. I think, people are just generally kind of distrustful. Like here, James has another question here. It's like, the privacy versus government overreach and accessing my wearables. Tyler is saying like, he wears a Garmin watch, but he's been rethinking it a lot lately. The problem is the data collection, the GPS, and the NN-EMF factors. And then Rhett was saying, look up the spot Apple watches have left on people's hands from said wearables. So, I mean, there's like, I would say those little wearables and the little AirPods, like, they, I'm sure, can be also pulling in additional information beyond just what's going on. Damo, what do you have under that?
I still haven't bought wired earbuds.
Still haven't bought wired earbuds.
Credit cards come first and paying it down, man.
You can. Your StreamYard's pretty good at canceling out the audio too. Like, and you got a good mic, little piece. Like, I'm just using that. Just using the computer.
Yeah, I've got a housemate a couple of rooms over watching TV. I'm trying not to bother him.
I had one. I took it off. I was like, I'm not going to wear this anymore.
Yeah.
I think the bottom line is, I don't think anybody should be wearing an Apple Watch 24/7. If you're going to wear it, you wear it, you do your thing. And even now, like even my phone, when I'm going to exercise or do something, I don't even want it on my body. I want to try to figure out a way. So I'm holding it in my hand, like away from my body. I tell my kids that. We try to turn our Wi-Fi off at night. I mean, at some point, we're going to have to use the technology we have for the best we can, for the best outcome, and for, if you think so, as minimally as possible. But that doesn't mean you couldn't put a wearable on for 2 days in the morning for an hour while you eat your breakfast and understand. I think most Americans would find that their habits after wearing a wearable for 1 day is not okay.
Yeah. And I mean, like for me, I'm like borderline obsessed with the idea of being able to get better real-time data. Like I've been doing this gut healing thing. I'm working with Cooking with Chris. It's awesome. Step one basically was getting some labs done. And not only did I have to drive like 45 minutes away to do that, it takes like 5-6 days to get results. And then if I wanted to do it again, I'd have to do the drive. It's expensive and I'd have to wait again. And then the stool test that I had to send in, that's like a 21-day delay. And the thing is, what it's checking for can change so much in those 21 days. I would love for technology that would allow me to get high fidelity data over and over again, easily and consistently. But the concerns brought up so far, the ones I kind of agree with, first and foremost is that I don't necessarily trust the government in a system where it's catching my data in real time all the time. And then you got the secondary design issues of like, is there EMF issues? Is there any other weird stuff that they just, they're not there yet.
Sandra says there's no safe wearables. Unfortunately, you're wrong, because the G-string I have on right now is safe.
Oh, snap. And Rhett is also saying 6G. We're now talking about the next thing. Aims to monitor our health beyond wearables. They want to turn us into living antenna with graphene oxide, for crying out loud. I was watching a video of Jeff Berwick. He was up in Washington working with Anna Malauchua, doing blood analysis, looking at the nanobots inside of his blood, how they are organizing and growing. And it's interesting. I was talking to a friend whose mother-in-law is in having a really tough time. Her vaccine card has 8 fillings, has 8 entries on it, and she just suffered one of the worst blood clots. And when my friend went to the Mayo Clinic to go visit her, he had to park about a mile away because the parking lot was completely full. It is the busiest place ever, that Mayo Clinic. And, in going there is absolutely no connection whatsoever between anything that she's suffering from and the potential inoculations. They do not correlate at all. But I will say business, and he said this, business at the Mayo Clinic has never been better. So, that's sad. I want to say, let's shift now. We got Wayne in the house. He's been patiently waiting backstage. Let's bring up Wayne. Let's dive in, everybody. Welcome to the stage, Wayne. How we doing, buddy?
Good. Good. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. There's I don't know how much Billy told you about what I have been involved in, but there's a broad range of topics to talk about. So
where would you like to start?
Let's do this. Anything we were just talking about, you want to chime in on? Anything we were just saying about wearables or tech, or let's do that first.
I don't know that much about wearables. I've listened to this conversation for 10 years. I was at a conference probably 10 years ago in which people from Silicon Valley were just falling all over themselves to create a zillion different types of wearables. It was like the hot thing before AI came along. And, I don't know that it gives you what you really want. And but that won't stop it from becoming a thing in the marketplace. It's because that's sort of that's healthcare's middle name is let's do all kinds of things to distract you from the process of being healthy. So that said, I think the place where I want to start is, so I'm going to give a little bit of my background to give context. My career began in neuropharmacology research. I worked at SmithKline and French Laboratories in Philadelphia, where I was born and raised. So I had this hardcore science background, and I got that job when I was 18, actually. I didn't have my undergraduate degree, which back then you could do. You couldn't do it now, but you could back then. I was invited to work in the lab of Roger Sperry, the guy who won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in '81. Roger won the Nobel Prize for really articulating the fact that you got 2 brains, one on the right, one on the left. And that is mostly, for the most part, that's still a mystery, by the way, 50 years later. That's beside the point. But I make the point because I had this remarkable opportunity to work with some really spectacular scientists. And then I left and went into finance, and I got into pension finance. And that's relevant for a couple of reasons. One, kept my brain busy. Two, I developed the first pension fund fiduciary training program in the United States. So it was endorsed by the largest association of finance officers. That's relevant because after I did work for the Federal Reserve during the collapse in '08, that's a whole nother podcast. I left finance and turned that fiduciary lens onto healthcare. And when you do that, it's a cesspool. And I don't think I'm pretty sure people don't realize just what kind of cesspool that is. It's like in every direction you look. And it was, so here's an example of two instances in my life experiences that shaped what I eventually came to do. One of which was, in spite of the fact that I was trained in pharmacology, I got turned on to what is sometimes called light therapy, low-level laser therapy. Sometimes it's called photobiomodulation because whoever came up with that name apparently is a Scrabble champion. The idea is you shine light onto soft tissue, and it could be various wavelengths of light. Sometimes they do different things, very different things. Sometimes they all do kind of the same thing. But in this case, my father, who was diabetic and had been diabetic for 12 years, mostly lived in a wheelchair. He could walk, to a door that was 30 feet away, but it would take him 20 minutes to do it. After being treated with a near infrared light at a frequency, it wasn't a spike, it was more like a curve, but it peaked at around 640 nanometers. It was used on acupuncture points behind his knees and around his ankles. Behind your knee are 3 acupuncture points, one kind of on each side and one in the middle. And about 24 hours later, 75% of my father's diabetic neuropathy was resolved. So mind you, I was trained in pharmacology. Shining a light behind the knee and having, diabetic neuropathy go away, that did make a lot of sense. But one thing was clear, and I sent you guys a picture of it. If your producer could put that up, that would be a good time because I could explain it. The nerves, clearly the diagnosis of diabetic neuropathy, which is the nerves are dead or dying, was wrong. That is still, there it is. That diagnosis is still used today. It's prevalent in the metabolic syndrome,
What are we looking
diabetes
at here,
space.
Wayne?
So the left picture is a picture of my father's feet, when he was wheeled in prior to the first treatment. So he was wheeled in a wheelchair into the clinician's office, and that is what diabetic neuropathy looks like. The feet are blue. You're using an infrared camera to measure the heat distribution coming off of the skin, and they're blue, much like a mountaineer would. His peripheral limbs would turn blue when you're climbing because
he's got cold feet.
It's got cold feet, and
He's got cold feet.
yeah. So when you injure those feet, if he banged them up and they would bleed, they wouldn't heal. This is why people ultimately get their limbs cut off from advanced diabetes. The second picture, the middle picture, was taken 24 hours after the picture on the left. It was before the second treatment. So my father had a 35, 40-minute treatment with the infrared light behind his knees and around his ankles. Now you can see that blood flow has returned substantially, and my father could walk. In fact, right before that picture was taken, we were in a shopping mall, kind of killing time before the second visit with the clinician. My father literally got out of the car and started walking. He hadn't done that in, 10 or 12 years or so.
Wow.
So the picture on the far right was 24 hours after the middle picture, which is 48 hours after the picture on the left. And now you can see the diabetic neuropathy has resolved. More blood flow has returned to both of his feet. My father, we flew him home, and the wheelchair was in luggage. He walked back into the assisted living center. And as if that's not crazy enough, I used to shoot my father with what was called Lilly 7030 at the time. It's insulin. And he never needed it again. After 3 treatments with light on acupuncture points behind the knee and around the ankles, my father's pancreas started working again. So I'll just put that down under the column of crazy talk, because that's certainly what it seemed like to me. And it took me 15 years, because in science, you come up with some anomalous sort of observation, something that just doesn't make any sense.
Are red lights, are these LED lights or?
This was an optical device. It was much more powerful than most LEDs in getting the light to penetrate deep into the skin. And but you could find an answer to the question, how the hell do you explain that? You just can't find it in the pharmacology literature. You have to look in the biophysics literature. And there was an Italian group, I think out of the University of Milan, Lopini, as I recall, was the name, who articulated that the architecture of the cellular structure of the islet of Langerhans, where insulin comes out of normally, is arranged like a liquid crystal display, and like a quartz crystal, and they're very efficient at energy distribution throughout the tissue. This isn't something really an ordinarily trained physician would know, because they're not trained in biophysics, could know because they don't normally look in the biophysics literature, and they're not trained to think as a biophysicist would think. So, but when anytime there's an interference in the energy distribution throughout the crystal, they don't open up the calcium channels, and the release of insulin is inhibited. So, I can't say that that's categorically known and proven as to that's what happened, but I can say it was the best hypothesis I ever ran into. And here's the thing: so I'm pretty sure at the time I didn't know how to spell acupuncture. Yeah, like most people, I'm like, what's an infrared photon? Because when I went to college, there was a neutron, an electron, and a proton, and that was kind of it. And so I spent years at that point going, what is this stuff? How do you explain what an acupuncture meridian is? And it turns out that there are things you can observe about that. Like there was a paper published, God, it's got to be 15 years ago, maybe it's more than that now, in which they injected sort of a radioactive dye, I don't remember what type, directly into an acupuncture meridian and watched what happened, and they traced it because of the radioactive trace that you can make, and they could see the acupuncture meridian light up. And if you put in a bolus of the same radioactive dye, whatever it was, about an inch to the right or the left of the meridian, it would just be a diffusion bolus, like a little round sort of blob. It never traveled down anything you could call a meridian. So I then took a deep dive into acupuncture. It was about it. This, by the way, was all done at a pain clinic. The engineer who created the liquid nitrogen cooled infrared camera and the optical device told me, hey, they're having great luck with pain patients and diabetics at this clinic outside of Pittsburgh. So I talked to the clinician. She's like, look, it costs about $1,000 for 3 sessions. If we can't help in 3 sessions, it's not going to work. But we had pretty good luck at this. So I took my father out there and figured the worst that would happen, light wasn't going to hurt him. And the worst that would happen is it would cost us $1,000. Mind you, this is 2001.
Wow. Now, I know one quick search on like Google, and like you're seeing a whole plethora. I just want to just quickly jump in here and just show for example, here's this guy.
Technologies that I've been testing out recently is the Magellan red light therapy bag. This device is actually an all-encompassing bag zipped up around yourself like a medical spa treatment, giving you the ability to set different levels of intensity depending on what your desired outcome is. And this red light therapy technology, what's been used in sports medicine for many years, is FDA approved for home use. Technology that I've been testing out recently.
Yeah. So 24 years ago, this was crazy talk. Not so crazy anymore.
Not so crazy anymore. It looks like a good bag. Like you probably put it on some of my meridian points, right?
Yeah.
Well, so it turns out about a year after that incident, that experience with my dad, the engineer had some contacts at the Cleveland Clinic. we walked in with the same device used with my dad, and we were treating, now the Cleveland Clinic's pain clinic, you know, the reputation is it's the best in the world. We could argue about that, but that's the reputation. And they allowed me to treat 8 CRPS patients. That's chronic regional pain syndrome. It used to be called RSD, reflex sympathetic dystrophy. It's meant to imply a severe syndrome. It's like the worst human suffering you could imagine. Every single one of these people had a spinal stimulator implanted, a morphine pump. They're on 15 to 20 different meds a day. I mean, horrendous stories of suffering. And I treated 8 patients. 7 of them within 24 hours had a spectacular result. Pain scores went down. And I thought, man, we're set. You know, the Cleveland Clinic's going to want to invest in the company. They're going to buy a bunch of instruments. This is like our day. And they wouldn't even return my phone calls. This was in 2002. So you got to see up close and personal how the system actually works. Because the Cleveland Clinic, I don't know what the number is today, but I'm guessing the average pain patient walks in and it's a $400,000 price tag that someone's going to pay to get them on spinal stimulator or morphine pumps and 20 to 30 meds a day after all the neurological workup that they do. You can't walk into a place like that and say, you know, we can just shine a light behind the knee and use acupuncture meridians, 2 to 3 office visits, man, we're good.
Wasn't it Goldman that asked or suggested that cures are not a viable business strategy, not a sustainable business strategy?
And so I'm gonna leave that story for a second and tie in another story and then weave the cloth as to what we have gotten to do and what Billy was interested in. So in 2010, I had now spent many years on the boards of biophysics technology companies, meeting with doctors who use this stuff, scientists who could explain this stuff. I mean, the former medical director of NASA, who had all kinds of interesting devices in his clinic. And I would ask him, you know, how did you ever get turned on to this? He says, well, all my patients were in a very unique environment that we didn't know how to think about it. And that is there was no gravitational fields. So one of the first, now in every spaceship that goes up, there's a pulsed electromagnetic field that stimulates bone remodeling so that their bones don't decay while they're in space. That was one of the things that came out of this guy's work. Well, so I had, and, you know, I had done, as I said, work for the Federal Reserve during the collapse because I had, by then, consulted on well over $100 billion from the fiduciary governance perspective around the world. My largest commercial accounts in the U.S. were Honda, the car company, and State Farm, the insurance company. But I had done work for foreign governments. And so longer story shorter, I had a meeting with a guy by the name of Anthony Rogers. He was the assistant secretary of HHS. And I walked in with 2 PhDs and a 1-star Army general who ran 10 Army hospitals in the southeastern part of the U.S. And we made sort of this impassioned plea of, you know, I don't know what the limits of these biophysical therapies are, but and we might run into them. But I'm pretty sure the low-hanging fruit is going to save you 20%. At the time, that would have been about $120 billion a year out of CMS's budget. Now it would be a lot more. But Anthony Rogers put his pen down on his pad and said to me, we don't, and this is a quote, we don't have a way to pay for things that work. So, you know, it's one of those moments where you're like, nah, he couldn't possibly have said that. But so I asked him, are you telling me that all the people that have been in this town, DC, since Medicare was created, no one thought to create a mechanism just in case you came up with something new that you'd pay for the new thing and not the old thing? That's right. So it was very clear to me as a finance guy that what was needed then and what's still needed now is a payment system to pay for the stuff that works. So if you ask the question, well, one, what would that look like? How do you get there? How do you get the ball across that goal line? You go, well, you'd have to know what works. So that's a data issue because now you're going to have to capture data on stuff that works. And in an ideal world, it works is not an absolute assessment, but a relative one, because it's always easy to do. And this is what businesses do all the time. You know, when they need a new ERP computer system, of some kind to do some specialized data crunching. They'll look at a couple of different vendors and they'll try to figure out which is the most cost-effective thing to do. That doesn't happen in medicine at all. So we figured out that to set up a payment system, one, you had to change what healthcare data meant, like how to think about it. So you had to set up a way of thinking about what would the requirements be as a technology matter. And it took you completely away from how healthcare data is dealt with now. And I don't know if you have, so I don't know if you have that, the 4-box thing that where the upper northern quadrant box is in yellow. I don't know if you can put that graphic up. But if you're going to do a basis of comparison, after 10 years of really diving into, holistic healthcare and sometimes called functional medicine, naturopathic medicine, systems biology, they're kind of all synonyms for the same thing. It's looking at human health through a lens in which you recognize that reductionist medicine fails to understand what we are.
Is it graph 3 about frequency and magnitude and wave number?
No. It was, I think the second document I sent you, it was in a 2-page document. It was a 4-quadrant box, and one box was yellow and the others were empty.
Okay, yeah, this one. Here we are.
Okay. So once we understood that it was a data issue, and I'll explain that as soon as you get the box up, we also understood that you had to have a basis of comparison. So
there's the box.
So there's the box, and so the labels aren't on there, but basically the box in the upper left-hand quadrant was where some data exists as to answer the question, does whatever you did to the patient work? And that comes from claims. So if you put some label on the left side of that yellow box, you might call it conventional medical care, and you would have claims data that would give you some sense, not a complete sense, not a well quantified sense, enough to satisfy a rigorous sort of scientific standard, but would give you some sense of what claims data might look like to answer the question, hey, did what the doctor do to the patient work? And if you put on the box that's to the left of the bottom quadrant, the one that's grayed out, and you call that holistic healthcare, what you find out is there's almost no claims data. So you couldn't compare the data that might show up in the box in the left-hand quadrant to the box in the yellow quadrant because it doesn't exist. There's no way to do a comparative cost effectiveness analysis. No one collects the data. And that is in part because most things like red light therapy, historically was used and was given a reimbursement code. So whatever doctor, whatever type of doctor, podiatrist, family doc, used a red light to stimulate some response in the body, they might get paid $16. So obviously someone trying to help a patient and charging $16 for what they did, you can't stay in business. So you have the problem of the payment system not only doesn't gather data on what works, so you can't compare anything like holistic healthcare or whole person care to standard of care, conventional medicine. Not only can you not make that comparison, but the determination of, well, how much we're going to pay the doc for producing a result has nothing to do, nothing at all with an answer to the question, did it work for the patient? So let me say that a little differently. Of the $5 trillion that the United States spends, and you can let go of that graphic for the moment because I got enough juice out of that visual. The United States spends $5 trillion a year on healthcare. Not a nickel of the $5 trillion is determined on the basis of answering the question, did it work for the patient, whatever you did, and how well? So you can't find any line item on the financial statement or balance sheet of any company that's so inept because no data is captured. And so the long and short of it is I spent the last, I'll say 20,000 hours along with some other people trying to figure out if you wanted to make a payment system that would pay for medicine that works, what are all the pieces of the puzzle you got to fill in? And it turns out that you have to kind of do everything differently. Of course you do, because the system doesn't do any of this now. So you have to do something different clinically, like using red light therapy or using pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, like what the head of NASA's space medicine did. Professional athletes, when they get injured, they use what's called a high energy PEMF device. It's maybe 20,000 volts and 2 amps, but it shoots a very strong magnetic field deep into the tissue to arrest the development of an inflammatory cycle, like deep in like thigh muscle or something. And I own one of these devices.
Which device do you own, Wayne?
I own something produced by Pulsed Energy Technologies. It's a spectacular device. Shaquille O'Neal has one. This guy only sells his stuff to like professional sports teams. And if someone who owns a sports team uses it, as you said earlier, on someone who's worth $15 million, they're going to do it because it works. That's how you know. So there's several impediments to.
Is this the one?
No, that's a red light. That's a red light pad. There's by the way, there's a zillion of these things out there. And
there's a lot. There's a lot out there.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show this one specifically. I know there was a whole thing about people saying red light's good for male wellness. And this is specifically like, it looks like a jock strap that's full of red light. And I was reading some of the reviews on it, and they were saying that this thing lasts, it's good. It's good.
So I want to ask a question right here, because I think I want to boil this down for a lot of people on what can we actually do? Because a lot of us can't afford a $15,000 piece of gear. And I ordered one of these red light things on Amazon for $160. It was made in China. I got the glasses, I put it on, and my paranoia set in that this thing was like giving me the wrong red light. It wasn't the right red light frequency. It was going to blind me. I read all the reviews. So I'm like, okay, I need to talk to a professional. And then like literally 2 months later, I meet you. Yeah. So is there something that we can do, or do we all have to go get the $15,000 piece of gear? Or do we have to go to
No. I mean, there are a zillion devices out there.
I got right there. I got that one right there.
Which
that
one?
On the left. That one on the left. That exact one. Yep.
So when it comes to LEDs, there's a lot of engineering that goes into the good ones, and not a lot of engineering that doesn't go into the bad ones. So red light is not singular in its impact. Red light in, I don't know, must be about 15 years ago. Maybe it's more than that by now. Actually, I think it was 2002 or 2003. There was a scientist that showed that red light applied locally to the skin will stimulate the development of ATP. This is several millimeters into the skin. And, a lot of disease is related to the lack of mitochondrial functionality, so that ATP production, the biochemical transduction that provides energy to the cell to do all of what a cell does, is stimulated. But it turns out that's near infrared light. And, there are wavelengths around 640 nanometers that get to do that. So I've seen people, and it's true with a PEMF device. It's true with a low energy PEMF device, or a red light device, or a green light device. You can apply this to like someone in their 60s or 70s. And I've done this, and they feel like they're 20 years younger. It's really quite astounding. It's just a matter of, we call aging, that's what we call this clinical syndrome of your mitochondria are not operating the way they did when you were younger. Therefore, the energy production in your body is diminished. Therefore, physiological processes like clearing waste out of a cell, detoxifying a cell, stimulating the cell detox pathways in the liver, all these things are dependent on energy production. And as you age, it's quote unquote normal unless you do something about it. Now, there's another thing that red light does, and this is important, and this is what we learned at the Cleveland Clinic, which is, and this is not something conventional physicians are trained in, there is a condition called dysautonomia. And dysautonomia is a dysregulation in the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, and they live in a kind of a balance. And when, for some reason, often soft tissue damage, sometimes a TBI. There could be metabolic causes of it as well. When the balance gets disrupted, so that you could have, some people will call it Raynaud's disease. That's just one example of a dysautonomia. Your hands are constantly cold, kind of like my father's feet were constantly cold. But there's others, and chronic pain is a dysautonomia in which the problem is not pharmaceutically based. So pharmaceuticals can't fix it. They can only mask it. And when we used the infrared light therapy, with the near infrared light therapy on the CRPS patients at the Cleveland Clinic, it served to recalibrate the dysautonomia so that the body's natural healing processes could begin to take over. In general, the body will be able to heal itself as long as there's nothing blocking it. And if you have a dysregulation in the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, the healing process is blocked. Now, here's the thing. An astounding amount of chronic, like advanced MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, a whole bunch of immunological disorders have a component of dysautonomia that is part of the clinical profile. Doctors aren't taught to think about the nervous system's operations that way, so they can't fix it. And thus, biophysics represents a huge opportunity for clinical medicine to really advance and become more useful to patients, and for that matter, more cost-effective for whoever's paying, Medicare, Medicaid, self-insured payors, cities, states, labor unions, whoever it is. There's a whole bunch of things about, the thing about it when people go, how do you know it works? We speak about innate design. So I was trained in reductionist science and pharmacology. And the heart of reductionist science is, can you take something apart into its smallest components, study the components and the relationship to one another, and understand how they work when they're operating in a whole intact system? And the answer is you can't. It's very difficult to do, partly because in an intact system, like there's a principle in systems biology called emergent properties. And an emergent property, when you look at a complex adaptive biological system, basically says when something is operating intact in the body, in the way that God or evolution, whatever, designed it, then there are properties to that operation that you cannot see or examine when you take it apart. And because pharmacology and all clinical medicine is really based on reductionist science, then you can't understand what looking through human physiology, health, disease, what it looks like when you look through a systems lens. And this is why we use systems biology as a basis of comparison to standard of care medicine. We already know standard of care medicine doesn't work so well. How do we know? 92% of the money we spend is on chronic disease. Chronic disease is chronic because whatever they do doesn't fix it. This is not complicated. So we know how well that works. Now we got to do the real comparison, and then from there you can change the system. I'll stop because I said 4 mouthfuls and let you ask some questions.
I have a question that probably seems off topic, but it's something that's come up in my world, and I'm sure many, that I've always had just this innate desire to say, no, I don't know about that. And even recently with my dog, had a little lump and they wanted to do a biopsy, and I said no. Colon cancer, polyps in the colon, tumors in the body, they always want to cut it open, inject and stuff. And I've read those reports of saying once you do that, you're releasing it in the body. And that to me is an intact, and I've read some articles on this, albeit I can't quite understand it. Some of the things that you're saying, quite frankly, over my head, but I do get the idea that our body encapsulates some of this stuff and then tries to break it down. And when we cut into it, maybe we're doing something that the body's not quite ready for. Does that go into what you're talking about at all on any level?
Absolutely. So for example, scar tissue from some internal injury acts like a capacitor. So if you're an electrical engineer, you know what a capacitor is. And, capacitor, it alters the electromagnetic communication of cells around the injury. Think about pushing your thumb into a computer screen. It kind of makes a funny mark on the screen, like the visual that you see when it does that. It's a little bit like what happens to your body. And this is why microcurrent, something called frequency specific microcurrent, it's a 2-lead device. It shoots a frequency and electrical charge into the body, but not like a TENS unit like we might have been treated with back in college if you had a tennis injury. But it shoots 2 different frequencies on 2 different leads, and it creates a kind of a harmonic inside the body. And that harmonic will bust up scar tissue. I have seen this 1,000 times. And just as an example of, how deep I got into this, I think it was 2016, maybe. So I in 2016, I became a technical advisor to the Air Force Surgeon General on the adoption of integrated medicine. And integrated medicine to them didn't really mean nutrition. They had some interest in it, but it really meant bright, shiny things because it's the Air Force. So we started, we brought all these devices into the Air Force, and I interviewed with, at the time, 5 of the last 6 surgeon generals. They're very interested in using energy fields to heal. Turns out the Russians were probably 30 years ahead of us, Germans as well. So we're kind of slow at this, mostly because the adoption of it, given the payment system, it doesn't, you take someone who's diabetic neuropathy, can't walk, can't work, therefore, and a severe injury might lead to the amputation of a leg. This thing is, the status quo of their condition costs the system a lot of money. So, but if you then go and fix it, you're now saving, you not only save whoever's paying for it a lot of money, the human capital gets better. And, there's so many disease states in which we could use this. And that's kind of our job, is to get this thing commercialized in a way that recognizes that a payment ought to be made for the value created for the patient. I mean, if Medicare or Medicaid would pay for treating people whose prognosis is to get their leg or foot or toes cut off because the diabetic neuropathy, the surgeons will tell you it could lead to gangrene, and once that happens, everything gets worse. True statement. But if you could use this kind of therapy to prevent a $150,000 bill, how much should the doctor get paid for doing it? I would assert more than an office visit. It's in the government's best interest. It's in the patient's best interest. And, so when people often ask me, look, the Air Force relied on me so I should take a step back. These generals were like, Wayne, there's so many things we could study. We could be studying this for years. Yes, you could. So I said, if I was in your shoes knowing what I know, I would build an informatics platform to document this stuff. Why? Because it'll take you 100 years to take every damn thing you could see on the internet that's being sold and study it. And some of them are good, some of them are bad. But if you studied it en masse, like through a biophysics lens, you're going to learn something. And so they gave me at the time $9 million to figure out what does it mean to build an informatics platform on systems biology, i.e. integrated medicine. So we got deep into the topic. And it's really quite fascinating because biophysics sounds like a big word. A lot of people don't know physics and they love the word quantum. Fine. But think about what biophysics has done to clinical medicine in the realm of diagnostics. I mean, from the first time Röntgen had his wife's hand x-rayed in 1895, and now we can see inside the body, to an MRI, to a CT scan, to an fMRI, this changed what medicine meant when you could see inside the body. That's the application of biophysics. An MRI, you put someone into a tube, you generate a huge magnetic field around them, and you use tiny little magnetic fields to fine-tune the big magnetic field so that the water molecules release a radio wave that can, through an algorithm, be turned into a graphic. It's biophysics, and it changed medicine. And if you apply biophysics to therapeutics, it will do the same.
Hear, hear. Before you brought it up on your own, when you were describing the treatment that you had your dad go through, I was going to ask you if it had any sort of a relation to Chinese medicine and meridian points, and then you brought it up on your own.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that, and I'm glad to see it, right? Because it feels like we're just stuck in a human trait of paradigm supremacy, where the thing we're doing that we feel has worked so well must be better than what came before because it's the paradigm that we're used to and we think it's so great. But Chinese medicine, man, and Ayurvedic medicine, the Indian analog to Chinese medicine, both seem like they understand a lot, even though they don't frame it the same way we do. But it's systemic. It's not based on this atomizing of every body part or molecule.
It's important to grok that while language made us nouns, Mother Nature made us verbs.
I like that.
And there's a big difference as to how you would look at something through a noun lens or a verb lens, how you would treat it, how you would document it. And that's a huge piece of the puzzle. You know, in science, you know, you could look at some of the biggest sort of discoveries in calibration of paradigms over time, like Einstein. Einstein, turned time from something that the little thing on your wrist would tell you what it is to, nope, it's all relative to how you move. And just because we're all moving in the same speed, because we're on this blue planet, that doesn't mean anything. If you moved faster, time would elongate. It would change everything. And, when we first discovered the genome, when the guys convinced President Clinton to give him $3.5 billion, the thought was they thought there was 150,000 proteins. What they're going to find out is there's about 150,000 genes, and they'll find out what's wrong with every single one of them that goes bad, and they'll establish an entire pharmacopoeia of 150,000 things that can fix all human disease. It was a static model. What they eventually found out is it don't work like that. We share 25% of our genes with a banana.
Yeah.
There are plants that have more genes than we do. First, they thought there was 24,000 human genes. Now they're down to somewhere less than 19,000. And oh, by the way, some of them, depending upon the environmental cues that are given to the cell through the nuclear membrane, they can produce up to 1,000 different proteins. So your body,
epigenetics there?
It's epigenetics. And so your body, so we went from a static to a dynamic system. Look at the gut biome. We had an entire pharmacology literature that never asked the question of 1,000 patients in a phase 2 or phase 3 clinical trial. Do these people have the same biome? We never asked it because we didn't know to ask it, but now we know the answer is no. And so, the profile of what a drug, whether it was under examination or even approved by the FDA, what it does to the biome, it is still not a requirement to assess it. And we now know that's kind of crazy because, somewhere north of 75% of your immune system is just on the other side of your gut, of that one cell lining. And, we haven't adapted to studying it based off of innate design. Mother Nature made us a verb. We just haven't caught up with it yet. And I know Bobby has an interest in that, Bobby Kennedy. The concept of health is an emergent property. We have a healthcare system that spends $5 trillion and no one defines health, not the government, not anybody who pays. How do you address something that you can't define? I mean, that's crazy on the face of it. And so we use the wrong paradigm to understand the problem. There's a thing in engineering. Elon Musk, sort of put it into the vernacular. It's called first principles. And engineers are trained kind of in semester 1 of Engineering 101. If you don't know how to solve a problem, it's because you don't actually understand the problem. There are assumptions built into how you frame the problem that are in fact inaccurate, And until you get past them and get to an accurate assumption, you're just not going to be able to solve it. There's no corollary to first principles in clinical medicine or in biology. So let me give you an example. What does that mean? The gold standard of science is you have a dependent and independent variable. You try to do an experiment to manipulate one around the other and understand the mathematical relationship between the two. Great. And in a system that contains only two variables, it's the right tool. What if you have 10 variables operating in a complex adaptive system? Some upregulate feedback loops, some downregulate feedback loops, but you only measure 2 of the 10. What do you think the probability is of coming out with the right answer? I mean, clearly, it turns out with 3 variable mathematics, it doesn't work too bad. You can fit 3 variables into the gold standard, but you can't fit 10. And this is one of the reasons why the replicability of the scientific literature is so bad. And it's a huge problem that has never really been solved. That's before you get to the corruption issue. This is just purely you're using the wrong tool to try to identify data that is going to help you understand.
So Wayne, what I'm hearing is like we're only like the current model, the current system is not looking at the full realm of information and data, and is prescribing and deciding policy, etc., based on a narrow. As we shift from I've kind of ascribed to this notion that we're in this age shift, and the models we're going to just see this new models emerge that make the existing ones obsolete. Like, what, in your opinion, like what's it going to take for us to to start including all 10 of these things, to reframing the general understanding of the system as a whole towards, it might not be all consensually agreeing on the definition of what health is, but thinking in a more depth about about really recognizing the how we can improve our civilization, humanity's health moving forward.
That's a great question. I want to say there's is there corruption that inhibits it? Yes, but it's worse than that. And in part it is because the notion of data silos or data information, the illiquidity of data is really a big impediment. So, I could talk to a doctor about systems biology. They probably heard of something about it. They know they probably weren't educated in nutritional biochemistry enough to understand, but they know that there's a there. But if I talk to them about changing the finance of how healthcare is paid for based off of what works, now we're talking about data, which is not something they're well trained in. And now we're talking about, a finance system that's not unlike what's used in corporate finance, something called economic value added. They don't know anything about that. So to get people to understand, here's the new ecosystem that you must stand up to solve the problem, you have several pillars. You have the clinical pillar, the data pillar, the finance pillar, and it's not easy to find people, whether it's in government or in, a large company, whether it's United Healthcare or a company like Boeing that just pays for healthcare for its people. It's not easy to find the talent that understands all those pillars and how they're woven into a new cloth.
Well, I would say that it's very difficult to find that talent, but I would also say it's impossible. There's no one person that's going to fully understand. Like, it's so complex. There's so many different there's so many different data. There's so much knowledge. Like, how can any one person? You spend your whole life, and you're
I'm not a spring chicken.
you're an expert on this, but you can't then. And this is where I feel like, the framing and utilization of like artificial intelligence perhaps can, help us, along with, the opening up of the data and the own your own data movement, and being able to, remove personally identifiable information, but share data along with, the correlating information into deep models that are then being trained and attacked. And like, you've got, unbiased, theoretically unbiased, and unlimited testing and retesting and analysis and correlation kind of taking place to establish or seek trends that, maybe it can get us to like, 8 or 9 out of the 10 potentially, or maybe in a perfect setting, 10 out of 10. I don't know.
So
This is one of the things that I actually mentioned to Bobby about, the need to create radical transparency within HHS, of data and within the healthcare system alone. Because right now, like, I don't have access to my health data. I don't. And like, neither do the best scientists. The data is in these silos, as you said, and it's not being utilized. It's not being captured, and it's not providing the signals that could be used towards creating better outcomes.
So I in the simplest of terms, I want to say that the solution to the problem begins with the leadership that wants the problem to be solved.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for the first time in my life, and I'll be 70, not too distant future, I think that leadership is there in the form of Robert Kennedy Jr. And not to say that he knows about all the different silos of data, but as a litigator, he understands the importance of data to be able to make a point. And it better be unassailable, otherwise someone's going to clobber you over the head with bad data. So he sort of gets the principles that you got to get. Mm-hmm. And it's the first time. I mean, look, I had conversations with people in the Obama administration, in McCain's campaign, in 2008 when he ran against Obama, the woman who wrote Obamacare is a woman who I knew, Sally Ann Payton. She was on the board of the Heritage Foundation. Very interesting woman, thoroughly dedicated to, what used to be called back then the complementary alternative medicine. But it was still a little odd back then. Systems thinking is a bigger deal now than it was years ago. And you got to tie there in 2001, there was something called Crossing the Quality Chasm, a report produced by the Institute of Medicine, I don't know, like 50 different people. And it's a little bit before everyone just, represented the drug company or the hospital association, mm-hmm. or before all the opinions got corrupted by money. And they took a look at the question, how do you fix American healthcare? And their conclusion was, one, you got to put the patient at the center of it. That doesn't happen. The patient's at the bottom of the hill, and we all know what rolls downhill. So that's one. Two, if you don't figure out what's working, then you don't know what to pay for. And so, in the MAHA movement, there's a zillion great ideas. I mean, there's a zillion important things that have to be done. But if you do them all, and it takes 10 years to get people healthier, one could argue Bobby will be gone by then. Whoever comes in later can undo whatever he did. And so you have to come up with a business model that can be adopted by the marketplace and let the marketplace work.
I'm glad you said business model, because as you were talking about Bobby and all the things government can do, I'm sitting here thinking market-based solutions. What can we do without waiting? And I'm wondering, is it possible, hypothetical, not necessarily hypothetical, to stand up an insurance company or a supplemental insurance company predicated on a network of holistic practitioners and alternative practitioners using these alternative therapies, focusing on nutrition, using the IR therapies, using even like peptide science and stuff like that, and not only offer those treatments, but gather the data in the clinical setting to start proving the point?
So the short answer, and I do mean short, is yes. Mm-hmm. The long answer mm-hmm. is it's a little more complicated than that.
I'm sure it is. Yeah.
I've sat with people who run $50 billion hospital systems, and they look at me like, why would I bother doing that?
Right.
Because in the final analysis, if you created a payment system based off of, hey, let's just pay for the stuff that works, those guys are going to be hurting. So there's that. Then they have the problem of, people have said to me, well, why doesn't, why doesn't one of the big insurance companies just do this stuff? And that's because insurance companies make a lot of money from selling their lists of doctors to employers. So I don't know what the number is now. It used to be $21 a month for every covered person. So like a big company with 175,000 people might pay United Healthcare, and I'm not picking on them, I'm just saying that's an example, might pay them 175,000 times, by now it's got to be $30 a month, just to have the list of accredited doctors. Then it's another $30 a month to cover everybody for any claims submitted, whether all 175,000 submit claims or not. So if you now are putting together a network of doctors who do all this other stuff, this non-traditional stuff, you render that list damn near useless?
Yeah, well, that's why in my hypothetical, hopefully not hypothetical, it's to stand up a new insurance company. I wouldn't expect, nor would I necessarily trust any of the existing ones to do so. And if anything, it's screw their system. Offer it to those who are willing, and prove its compelling nature. I'm sure there's some complexity too. Right, that's the American way, right? Just compete.
Is the innovative spirit, like when there's a gap, something like free market will come in and fill it, and especially we're starting to see the new gaps all over, and some of them there are these behemoth monopoly or oligopoly or cartel functions that are ruling over some of these industries. But I'll counter what Wayne said a little bit ago. It's like the MAHA movement, with the leadership, the leadership, it's inspiring as well. It's awakening more and more people towards the new paradigm of health. And so, out of the innovation that comes from this, especially, in this age where we're at, it takes 5 minutes now to build a dope website. Things are changing very rapidly. That that concept that Damo just threw out, could be spun up in a day, modeled out pretty well, and then fired out there into the ecosphere. Whether it hits or not is another thing. But if those are constantly firing, and the attempts are made and they're failing fast, if it doesn't work, iterate again. Try again. That's literally what they do on TikTok. They'll take the same video on 10 different accounts, and one of them hits. It's wait, that's the account we're gonna pile into.
Yeah.
So it's keep innovating, keep testing.
A combination of
the fact that the blockbuster behemoth is there and so powerful and so rich and so wealthy to be interfering in or to be suppressing you from going, and trying that. I'm hoping next week we're going to have Frank Ricotta from Burst IQ coming, who's used blockchain to create, to create this life graph, which is self-sovereign digital identity stack of all of your data in different shards to be able to share across. And we've talked at length about how, HHS, it has $1 billion problem of just fraud within HHS of double spending and overspending. They don't have good data. Underneath the organization, there is really shitty data pipeways and data travelage and data sharing, amongst the different parties and
offices and agencies. Yeah.
And it's time, you can't, you can't fight the system to fix it. You need to introduce new systems that just are, as Peter Thiel would say, 0 to 1. And it feels we're in this 0 to 1 age, and we're still kind of relying on fucking peer-reviewed studies that have been co-opted and controlled by a small cabal.
There's still a lot of doomerism too, of they'll just make it illegal or whatever, and it's well, make them make it illegal. We're do it.
Yeah. Oh, they're 10 steps ahead of you. You shouldn't even try. Fuck that. No.
Yeah, screw that.
Dude, because it's that like you said, doomerism, and guess what? That mentality shuts down a lot of people from even beginning too.
Yeah, it's self-defeating. It's you've already given up, but I haven't given up, so I'm down to do something.
I mean, our demo, we were in Puerto Rico, when we first met, you were talking about, it was like a community wealth distribution. Was it called Circle or something? Where it's like every month we all put $100 into this. There's 12 of us. Every month we put $100 in, and 1 month a year we get $1,200. We don't put $100 in. We get $1,200.
Yeah. That's called a lending circle. It's an alternative finance mechanism where you get a circle of people together. Everyone throws the same amount of money in per month. Say it's $100 a month, and every month it goes to one person. By the time it's gone all the way around, everyone's gotten out what they put in, but at one point or another, everyone had access to a large pool of money they wouldn't have otherwise had access to. And it's just an alternative finance system to the banking usury, fuck you, pay me model, for lack of a better word. It's a community finance model. Cooperatives, cooperative banking, cooperative insurance, those are old models that we could bring back, and then layer on technology like telemedicine, like these alternative devices, like these IR devices that are getting to the point where some of them are still $15,000 and weigh 500 pounds, right? But a bunch of them, there's a good unit out there for a few $100, and you can just mail it to somebody's house. And if it was high dollar enough, then you send it to a patient's house, they use it until the treatment's complete, have them send it back so the next person can use it. Like, we're there.
Yeah, there's retail opportunity too. There's like the tech is cheap. If you want to pick up some vacant lot and throw a pop-up in there for a month to see if it hits or not. Are people down to come lie in this infrared bed for a month?
Right.
For
Alternative medicine roadshow, the
$50,
the holistic carnival. Let's go. I'd get on that tour.
And a little bit of cabal.
Have any of you guys seen the Netflix show Live to 100 Secrets of the Blue Zones?
No, but I love the Blue Zones.
Yeah, so it's a documentary on these 5 places that they've studied, and they have the largest collection of people living to 100.
It's like Japan, planet. Somewhere in the
Okinawa.
So 2 of them are Okinawa and Sardinia, Italy, and they go over. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because they go over what they're doing differently, and they're all doing something quite differently. But the one thing that seems to be common among all of them is they are very active, and they're doing light duty work, and they're walking, and they have community, and they're doing gardening, and they're fresh making. Like in Sardinia, they're fresh making, and I think something, Wayne, you told me about, which was the sourdough bread. They're doing it a very specific way. Wayne was telling me that the bread of today in the United States has 17% gluten, whereas the old school, it was 3%. So the reason I'm bringing that up is we're talking about this idea of this other community thing. And the doomsayers that I've been hearing have talked about a number of things. One, AI is going to overwrite everything we're talking about, so that within 3 years, if Gates has his way and Gavi's filling you with medicine and you're going in and there's no doctor, the little AI robot's going to tell you what you're going to do, and you're going to take the blue pill and like it no matter what's in the blue pill. It's going to be a blue pill. It's going to look good. You're going to take it, and you're going to go out. They're removing the community. But what I see on the good side is that there are people and doctors like you, Wayne, that are moving out of the system. And like my mother is going to a dentist that is not in system. We have to pay out of pocket. They're not in system. It's a biodentist. They do things a very specific way. I think it's kind of a breakaway civilization, but it's like kind of a breakaway community. What aspect of that do you think is part of this? And do you think that's where we start? Because I see this as a very large uphill battle. One of the other things that the doomsayers will tell you is that there appears to be, and this appears to be true, controlled operatives, agents of distrust that are in this space to muck up the data and push us back to the old way when we're about ready to find our way down this new path. They're about ready. It seems as though they're about ready to shut off the path, put a detour sign, put an AI robot that says, no, don't go this way, take the pill. What are your thoughts on that?
On the one hand, yeah, of course there are. When I was in sales, in finance, we used to talk about if you sell this deal, whose bowl are you going to take rice out of? So now you're going to take $5 trillion of rice out of somebody's rice bowl, and they ain't gonna like it, no matter what. And look, it's not easy on Secretary Kennedy. About a month ago, right? 73, 75, I forget the number. Republican senators and congressmen basically said, keep your hands off pesticides. And, so the Democrats were after him, the Republicans were after him. I mean, he needs all of us. He needs all of us to be in the game because he can't do it on his own. It's not possible. And, when I was at the MAHA gathering in DC, and, a lot of really good-hearted people who I think in their heart and in their head are thoroughly committed to the MAHA vision and mission, but they didn't walk to the table with business plans. So in the real world, you got to be able to get from here to there. And that ain't easy. So I went looking. Yeah, I met with a lot of people who run hospital systems, and one guy in California who ran about a $1.2 billion system, I think it was. We had a common friend, and he gave me an hour of his time and said, "Do you know how much of my compensation is based off of innovating hospital operations?" "No, how much?" He says, "Not a nickel." So now tell me, how many people respond to their jobs when there's no incentive to do the thing that you and I might know needs to be done? I mean, how do you do that? How do you get past that? So this is why I personally spent 20,000 hours in those kind of meetings. Like, well, if I wanted to get past that, what do I do? Like, how do you do it? And we think we have the answer. But I also don't go out and tell everyone what the answer is, mostly because I don't want to get shot. But
Fair.
It's a without leadership, you don't have a prayer's chance. You just don't. It's a little bit like the COVID vaccine. When Pfizer first made their submission, I read through it, and my first thought was, who the hell put the C students in charge? Like, who would do that? And that's before you get to now what we know as an astounding amount of nefarious activity and a whole lot of stuff that passed for science, which was just nonsense. And there's lots of examples of this. This didn't start with COVID. This has been going on for a very long time. I mean, I worked for SmithKline French Laboratories, who ultimately produced Tagamet. And Tagamet was, meant to be a solution for stomach ulcers. They knew while they were marketing the stuff, there was a certain type of bacteria that you had to get at, and that would do it. And eventually, a guy won the Nobel Prize for it. But until the patent was up, they did all the suppression they could because it was cash flow time. And that's how the game works. So Democrat or Republican, it's how the game works for everybody. A lot of people think profit in healthcare is the problem. Profit is not the problem. There's a lot of nonprofits. Mostly they don't make a damn bit of difference in terms of the quality of outcomes. I mean, Kaiser might on the edges, but the problem is cash flows. Profit is an accounting phenomenon. Cash flows comes from the payment system. So you have to figure it out.
SmithKline, same one that became Glaxo?
Yep. That was it. GlaxoSmithKline. I mean, it was a great job. I mean, for me at the time. And it was another problem that, as I got introduced to, like, I would go to all these scientific meetings, the Institute for Functional Medicine and, the holistic healthcare associations. There's all kind. I met world famous people and world famous scientists. I once heard Siddhartha Mukherjee say a molecule, the guy who wrote The Emperor of All Maladies about cancer, spectacular writer, brilliant guy. He said, a molecule is a molecule is a molecule. And I sat there and I thought to myself, you're dead wrong, because all biochemistry occurs in context. So molecules aren't nouns either, depending upon the environment they're in. And they're going to have a different response to one molecular environment than another. And we've always known that. We've always known it because in high school we were shown pictures of cell membranes where calcium and chloride and magnesium and potassium and manganese and were all on the inside or the outside of the membrane, and they all had a charge to them. And you could recall the periodic table of the elements. It's organized by the neutral state of the minerals that are responsible for human physiology in their charged state. So oxygen has, a +2, a +1, 0, -1, -2 oxidative states in the body. They do different things because it's all contextual. The only thing that's not contextual is God. And we could argue that, and there's a bunch of people we could read about that. But all biological life, it's all contextual. The models have proven that time and time and time again. But we don't have a clinical medicine system that follows it. And as long as we use the kind of mnemonics like a neutral state periodic table of the elements, it trains us when we're young to not think about, geez, what's the charge that's imposed in that three-dimensional space? And what does that communicate to a membrane? Like I had this moment in my development of sort of grasping what all the biophysics stuff was about, that I realized the movement of charge is life. And that pharmacology was the study of the carrier of the charge. But it was the charge that was important, not the carrier. Because with charge came a kind of a new language, and it had syntax, and it had grammar and exclamation points, because that's the way the evolution made us. Mother Nature made us that way. And you talk to a doctor about energy fields, and they kind of look at you like, what the hell's wrong with you? How many Grateful Dead concerts did you go to?
Not enough.
Not enough. But you talk to a physicist about fields, and they're like, yeah, it's all that exists.
Yeah, it's all fields.
It's all fields. So somehow biology is 100 years behind. And when you begin to fix that, you got to create a new ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And no one in the existing ecosystem seems to me to be willing to create the new one.
And so, and on that, with like what you just said earlier too about, you were at the MAHA event, there's lots of nice people talking nice things, but aren't too many people doing things. Like, are you kind of referencing that in terms of like, because it feels like we're at the beginning, there's a good container here. Now it's like, how do we start bringing more people into it, highlighting those who are actually doing, supporting those who are supporting the innovators, or is it just better to have those with the highest follower count, like showing up and giving talks and like, airing like, the general advice? Like, I think, I think you need to have a little bit of both. You need to get the awareness, but we also must be supporting the actual missions and the companies and the innovators and the creators.
That's right. There needs, and look, there's a thing in CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation. I was at the first inaugural, having been sent there by the governor of the state of Washington at the time. And, they got $10 billion. It's not like I know everything that they've ever done, but I can't sit there and tell you that $10 billion was spent well, because I don't think anything of great significance came out of it. Mm-hmm. And they just in December they had 4 other programs going on, submitted by the big academic medical centers and some very fancy, well-known people in clinical medicine, all trying to manipulate primary care in some way to come up with something innovative. And they finally killed all of those programs because they figured out they didn't work. Because you can't ground yourself in standard of care medicine, try to put a different coat of paint on it, and somehow come out with something that's going to transform clinical medicine. It's just not going to happen. If standard of care medicine worked so well, we wouldn't be here. We would be, I'd be retired and hanging out with my grandkids. So
what would be like your advice to, like, because it sounds like you've interfaced with HHS a lot in the past. Like, I feel like a lot of people, like, they want to talk to Bobby, but like, to doing things, but I don't think people are too clear about, like, you know, if someone's working on something that's amazing, what's the best course of action towards, you know, getting audience and getting, you know, a moment in time, respect, listening ears and seeing eyes.
That's a good question. I mean,
Hire the K Street lobbyist, like that's the traditional way, but that's very exclusive to, you know, to the
Deep pockets.
Deep pockets, exactly.
You know, I have a personal answer to that question because I've done that both in finance. You know, I mean, I created this fiduciary training program, and eventually, you know, I got called by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve staff. Hey, we saw your training program endorsed by Financial Executors International. Could you throw your hat in the ring for building a fiduciary audit program for 8,500 commercial banks in the United States? They didn't have one. You could ask the question, how could you have 8,500 banks and not audit their fiduciary conduct? It's like $4 trillion under that umbrella, but they didn't have it. So I went to a lot of conferences and I would talk to people, sometimes just whoever I could run into, and sometimes pretty important people. And one of the things that you find a lot of times, like this guy, Anthony Rogers at HHS, I mean, he was very candid with us and he gave us an hour of his time along with the general counsel. Not everyone would do that. And, you know, bureaucrats come in different flavors and, you know,
just show up, like show up. That's like
the only thing that's ever worked for me.
Just show up. Like don't ask for permission necessarily to even show up.
No,
show up.
You can't ask for permission because the easiest thing for anybody in the game is to say no. Yep. It's just, you made their life a lot easier if they just say no and you go away.
Exactly. So, and show up, and you know, also when you push too hard on things, that doesn't sometimes work either. Like, you know, recognize those moments, those signs, those opportunities, that window. The question is, are you going to step through that door? Are you going to take that action? Are you going to ask that question? Are you going to, like, you know, seek that next step, you know, towards achieving ultimately your ideal outcome? And also sharing your ideal outcome, I feel like, is also really critical because people can't help you unless they know what you're trying to do.
That's right.
So,
I mean, I think that's dead right on. You know, there's a very well-known physician in the integrative medicine space who I met, I don't know, 15 years ago. And I was like the only finance guy that ever showed up at these meetings. They would tell me, oh, once in a while, someone from Goldman Sachs shows up, but they're just looking for, you know, a hot hit, and then they'd leave. And, you know, I had this experience with my dad, which was profound. I also took my wife to that clinic, and the neck pain she had for the first 20 years of our marriage disappeared. In the last 20 years, it's never come back. So I had these, you know, I had a lot of loved ones who got a lot of benefit out of this. And, you know, by the time you treat chronic pain people and some of them get better, you're like, I got to do this. Now, you know, I'm the son of a Marine who spent the last 2 years of World War II in the South Pacific. So I'm also don't fall far from that tree. And, you know, I mean, I was doing, my career was pretty good when I was in pension finance. And I asked my wife, do you mind if I stop and start doing this in healthcare? Because God knows it's needed. So I would tell you, it's really good to have a spouse who's supportive because otherwise the cost gets high. Mm-hmm. And I've been blessed to have that, and daughters who are supportive. So it's a, you know, I can't even tell you the number of times I met with people who are like, Wayne, I'm going to write you a check for 10 million and you'll get started next week. And then, you know, the week after, the guy wouldn't return my phone calls. I mean, we met with all kinds of billionaires. You know, I will tell you, I've known a lot of very wealthy people. There's sort of one exception to the rule, a woman who was married into the Walton family, very warm individual. But for the most part, there's kind of a spiritual pathology that goes on with very wealthy people. And whatever it goes on internally, then it's reinforced by often the people they have around them. And I have found that to be quite remarkable, sort of just to observe it. You know, there aren't too many. What's his name? Kenny Reeves, the guy who played in The Matrix. There aren't too,
Yeah.
can you? There aren't too many of them, and there's a lot more. You know, Bezoses who are like, oh, I need a new 450-foot yacht. You know, I met with people who were the head of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation who said Bill Gates has no interest in fixing healthcare. He thinks it's a political problem. So, you know, I met with Warren Buffett's people. I met with a lot of folks. And I'm not sure what goes on with folks when they have so much money, but something goes on that has them not think about the good they can do with it. So they still look to interact with the world the way they did when they first came into it. And it's kind of through a VC lens. And I you know, I feel bad for them. I do, because they're missing the part of, look, we all know it. At some point during your deathbed, and I don't know if you really go down a tunnel of light and meet a being of light. I don't know. I haven't been there yet. But you want to, seems to me like you want to go out of this world knowing deep in your soul you made a contribution, and that it was a real one, that it benefited a lot of people, and you left the world truly a better place. I mean, I every time you read about some spiritual discipline, it always talks about how that's why we came here. So, so it's important. I think I've learned, you know, you can't go around blaming doctors for what they're not trained in, what they're not paid for, or the fact that they work in a system that if they tried to do this, it would fire them.
Rating doctors is not like, it's not
You're not gonna solve the problem by doing it.
You know, it's like one of my friends is Brock Pierce, and he's like, you know, he's talked about what a real billionaire looks like, and that's positively affecting the lives of 1 billion people on this planet. And maybe that can be like the billionaire challenge, is like, can you really positively affect the lives of 1 billion people on this planet? Because making $1 billion, especially come from old money, or you make a good bet, like, oh, that's one tract of it, or being exploitative, or being profiteering, or, you know, catch the trend in the right way. You know, that doesn't, like, another house in Aspen, like, you know, that other yacht, really, like, is that really, like, do you know how much can be done? Or, you know, here, let's make large donations to philanthropic organizations that have giant staff that actually don't do shit. Or in some cases, like I'd say the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, actively, like, you know, promote a dangerous agenda and a control agenda and a, you know, an unhealthy agenda that serves, like, you know, the psychotic interests of a few.
To your point, Wayne, of walking down the hall, I want to mention one thing, because I don't know that I mentioned it here before, but you saying, you know, you don't know what happens when you walk down the hall, or you meet the person, or you see the light, or whatever. I had a spiritual experience, and I grew up in a Christian school, graduated from a Christian school with 26 people. I was fully informed of what hell was, and I was dying, a fiery place and all that stuff my whole life. I kind of ran from the church because of that, and investigated all the religions and came to my own conclusions. And I had my own spiritual encounter that was through ayahuasca. And what I was shown was that the hell that we are understanding to be hell is that specific time when you do pass, as you're passing, and I was kind of shown this through the DMT release, that your whole entire life and everything you've done does flash before you, and it becomes a very vast period of time that is encapsulated in a small period of time. And that vast period of time that it feels like is a hell on all the things that you could have done. So I'd imagine there's billionaires out there, and people that have done the bad things, and people that are sitting there with organizations just collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars while there's still 25,000 people almost dying of hunger every day on this planet, 1 billion looking for potable water, 18 people dying from veterans committing suicide, 100,000 people dying in hospital, acquired infections. You add it all up, and there's so many people that could have done something. I believe that if you don't do those things as you die and as you pass, that split second becomes an eternity to you, and it's shown to you all of the things you could have done, and that is our own personal health.
Yeah, I don't know Bobby Kennedy well. I've met him. I've spent some time at his house before COVID, but I am quite sure this man is very clear about the spiritual journey he's on. And it's no accident. I mean, his father was my childhood hero. And, I feel like it is my duty. I don't know how else to say that. It's my duty to do what I'm doing. And I might fail at it. I don't know. I mean, I failed at it before and walked away. And it was 2 days after the election that I got a phone call from someone close to Bobby who said, "Would you come back and do that project again?" I was just getting used to, going to the gym with my wife and 5 days a week and hanging out with my kids and my grandkids. And within 5 days, it all came together in a way I couldn't have believed. And, I know we have foreign governments that are very interested in what we're doing because they don't want this to continue. It's not easy to be a leader and to move something from the dysfunction it is to something better. It's not easy. So, so here we are.
So currently, you're looking at this point to raise a bunch of money to upend what is the current lack of healthcare that we actually have, and the system that is built on paying into something that actually doesn't make us healthy again, or doesn't put value on the things that actually do good. That's kind of what the overall synthesis.
We're in conversation with private folks and with government folks, looking for someone who has, for all intents and purposes, the courage and the money and the determination to fund a project. This isn't a theoretical thing. I mean, we literally have organizations that have agreed, where the board has said, go ahead, fix this. And, I don't want to get too much into the details to publicize it. I mean, if someone is really interested, then they can get a hold of you and, we can have a conversation. We have a lot of discussions going on. And, I want to say some people interact with us like, wow, if you get this thing launched in 2 years, you could sell it to United for X dollars. I'm like, yeah, wrong dude. It's not interested. I don't have to do that. And it's not what we're doing. So I don't know who's going to sort of be first. We have some friends and family money that keeps us going.
What's your organization called, Wayne?
Well, let's just say it's has a lot to do with nouns and verbs. Let me just call it that. We're still stealth, so we don't have our website up. We don't advertise. If you looked on LinkedIn, it says I live in Seattle and I'm retired. I'm not really retired, as you could probably tell, and I don't actually live in Seattle anymore. But because we want to talk to the people that we want to talk to, and one of the issues that comes up, a practical problem. There's an astounding number of people who genuinely, I think, intellectually would be interested in, now, how did you build the bridge between the existing system and the new one? How'd you do it? It's an interesting question. It's not a short conversation, but by and large, unless they are really dedicated, then I can't waste all my time with them. So I need people who are thoroughly determined. And when they get the details on us, they'll understand why we want that. And I should note, sometimes people call me visionary. That's a big mistake. When I did my pension finance work for Honda, the car company, their outside lawyers hired me to do a project for them. And essentially it was to audit a $7 billion pension fund. They don't hire, no lawyers hire visionaries to audit pension funds. They hire ridiculously detailed people. That's kind of my middle name, ridiculously detailed person. And so we we are looking for the right people, and I have confidence, not because not I have confidence in that the journey will be responded to, and that the person or persons will show up. And there's a lot of conversations that lead me to believe that's the case. So far, so good. But I got a 20,000 hour head start on anybody who's gonna try and unravel this Gordian knot now. So
and you need to lead with all that experience now and attract and be a magnet towards attracting the right people and the right resources, because capital is like, you need to establish that treasure chest towards and recognize and put all the action cards on the table. And how can we play those action cards kind of together? And that's like, this radical collaborative game that, I feel like we're entering into. And it's when we all start recognizing that, we're not playing fucking Monopoly here anymore, kids.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this isn't a win-lose game. This isn't actually even a win-win game either. We can, if played properly, we can make this a win to the power of win, or a win to the winth power, an exponential win for civilization, for all of us. And that comes through working together, sharing information, understanding, and letting others know what that end goal is, where you're ideally looking to get. Some people have very, very big visions. Some people have smaller ones, and that's okay. Not everybody needs to be like, and some people want to lead, other people want to participate and follow and learn too. Not everybody can be a master on day one. You generally have to be, the apprentice, and then the journeyman before you reach that level. So
we have a human capital and an aggregation of capital. It's probably about 80 people or something in the brain trust. There's a lot of world-renowned talent that also understands this has to get fixed. We just can't tolerate people who aren't willing to fix it anymore. We just can't. And I got Democratic friends, I got Republican friends. They want to argue with me over all kinds of stuff, and
it's not worth it to, like, your time is finite. So on that note, I want to say thank you, for sharing some of your precious, valuable time to, if nothing else, just come the three of us, and to the audience that's listening as well. I think, deeply appreciative. I feel like kind of scratched the surface. This was Billy warned me too. It was like, man, Wayne knows a lot.
Wayne's going to keep going.
He'll just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. And I write it, but we can't keep going all night long here.
It's true. I hope when you come out of stealth.
Going to wrap a little bit of a bow on this and just kind of say thank you. And on just the closing, I just, I really recognize that we have not actually highlighted Bobby that much. We've been talking about MAHA, but we don't really hear him and his voice. And his voice is so freaking beautiful and so powerful. And, based on what Billy was just talking about too, Bobby has, he was being, giving a talk the other day and said, talked about psychedelic therapies, being accessible within the next 12 months. I'm going to play a video that's going to take us out tonight. But I want to just thank everybody for being here. Last week, we talked about some great projects like Make Soil, which is a community composting initiative, like Chip Drop. We talked about inoculating logs on your land with mushroom spores to grow your own, to create a food forest over time. Northspore.com was one of the great sites that we looked at there. If you're interested in a MAHA hat, well, I said I was going to give away a MAHA hat, and I want to give it to our most active commenter, who was Rhett. Rhett, thank you very much. You win a light MAHA hat. Please DM me your address. You got it. Thank you very much for participating. We'll get that over to you. And if anybody else wants to support, go over to clubmaha.com, pick up a hat or something, or just cruise it. If you have any suggestions, let us know. If nothing else, just pray for the entire movement and participate and invite others to join in this as well. We'll be back next week. We'll confirm before. Thank you very much, everybody. You're right. Someone was asking, are Dustin and Ian ever going to come back? Tune in next week. Maybe they will be here. That's all I can say. But thank you so much, Wayne, for being here.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, Wayne. Appreciate it, man. Really nice to meet you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And, God willing, look, if a voice comes out of the wilderness and contacts you saying, I want to talk to that guy, so just let me know.
Deal.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for giving me some visibility. And Billy's right. I could keep going for a while. It's ridiculous. Short and sweet is not my middle name.
Yeah, mine either.
Amazing. Okay, well, let's continue the conversation a little bit later. If you want to hang out here, Wayne, we're just going to play this video and go out. Damo, last words?
Nope.
Billy?
Peace.
All right.
Much love, everybody. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week.
I'll just also preamble this video too. This video, I played it for Damo, and Damo was like, "Oh man, I'm gonna vote for Trump now."
What? What are you talking about?
Yeah, you remember we were driving the truck back across, and you're like, "Watch this, listening to Bobby." This is after he declared, and you're like, "Oh man, I need this MAHA, baby, even if it goes against."
Oh, right. After Kennedy had already dropped out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
totally.
All right.
I was stoked about this for sure.
I'm gonna refresh this one.
The bias about psychedelic drugs is again colored by my experience of being in recovery for 40 years. I don't think that in most cases that we can fix things that are wrong inside of us with things that are outside of us, with all the things that we reach for when we feel discomfort, whether it's drugs or alcohol or sex or reckless behavior. Particularly people who are prone to addiction are always looking for things outside of them to fill this empty hole that they have inside of them. Having said that, my wife in 2012 took her own life and left me with 6 children. And so all of those kids were at risk at time. And they all ended up doing really wonderful things with their lives. And one of them was worrying to me because he never processed his mom's death in a way that I could observe. He seemed like a happy kid. He was always smiling. He did get in a lot of fist fights. He became a boxer. And he won a lot of tournaments, and then he became a hockey player. But everything he did was a little bit of violence too, and it made me worried about him. About 5 years ago, he was very self-contained. He never talked about what was going on inside of him, and he went to Patagonia to kayak a whitewater river. And I asked this guy to put my son up for a couple of days while he was waiting for his trip to start. The night my son arrived there, that guy said to him, "I'm doing an ayahuasca trip tonight." And he said, "God sent you boys to me," because he was doing it with 20 Puente Indians. And he said, "I was praying to God that he would send me a gringo to do this with." And so my kid ended up doing this. And he had this experience where after he drank the ayahuasca, he felt himself sinking through all the geological strata of the earth. And he could look at he told me he could look at all the folds of stone and geology. And he had a total understanding of all of the processes that had laid them out for the eons. He ended up being propelled out of the other side of the earth and then floating through space for what he experienced as hundreds of years. And he would focus on a distant planet and be transported there. And each planet, he would have an adventure. At the end of the adventure, there would be a lesson, a moral lesson that he would learn, that he was supposed to remember. The last planet he visited, his mother was there. And she started passing through him in and out of him again and again. And every time she did that, he felt all these experiences of forgiveness, of love, of understanding, of comprehension, of empathy and compassion. And when he came back from that trip, he was completely changed. He was very open about talking about his feelings. He was on a real spiritual quest. The reason I really know that it changed him is he started taking out the garbage and doing the dishes. And he's done the dishes constantly without ever being asked since then. He's a 24-year-old kid. So you know that's a miracle. So that opened my mind to the possibility that there may be, something that I didn't understand or that was outside of my kind of bubble of prejudices. And then I have a friend who's a Navy SEAL who had severe PTSD, and he went to Costa Rica and had the same kind of experience. And I had a couple of other friends who were in the NFL, and they also had severe brain injuries and depression, terrible, terrible depression. And the same thing happened. And then I looked at Michael Pollan's documentary, which I think is on Netflix. I think the third show is on psilocybin. And there's a kid on that show who had severe OCD. He literally could not go out of his house. And he did one psilocybin trip and it was completely gone. So my mind is open to the idea that, there may be things that I don't know about and that people ought to have the freedom and the liberty to experiment with these things. I like what you said at the outset, which is, we know the capacity of the pharmaceutical industry to come and capture this if they see that there's money in it, and then to turn it into something very, very bad and to promote it in ways that it shouldn't be promoted. My inclination would be to make this available at least in therapeutic settings and maybe more generally, but in ways that would discourage the corporate control and exploitation of it.
I mean,
so beautiful.
Like,
Yeah.
I get emotional watching that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
that was January of 2024. That was a video put out by the Kennedy campaign, like in the heart of it. Like, it just goes to show how, truly different. It's the flashbacks of why I committed my whole life towards Bobby, the Remedy Kennedy. Let's go for president, baby. And also feeling like, really good that, he is where he is at this moment, able to focus because he is the man for this job and he really knows it. And we got to continue to have Bobby's back. Bobby, I'm sorry, please forgive me. Grateful. Love you. Let's go. Let's grow.
Yeah.
Farewell.
Yeah.
Farewell, guys. Be good.
You play the hand.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
All
man.
right.
MAHA, adapting ancient traditions into remedies for modern living.